Welcome to our program today. I'm Siobhan McDonald from Granger Street Studios, and today we're talking about making a good impression with Impressionism. Let's get started with our program. I always thought I was a little bit of a rebel, but it turns out I am not nearly as rebellious as this group of artists. Today we're going to learn a little bit more about the Impressionists and see why I call them the rebels of the 19th century. AgeSpan hosts us every month and makes sure this program gets delivered to you. They connect people of all ages and abilities with information and services to help them lead fulfilling lives in the community. And we're so thankful to award-winning Right at Home Boston and North for sponsoring this program. With over 20 years of providing home care services, their proven professionalism, caring, and commitment continues in our communities. Thank you, Right at Home. In the 1870s, the Western art world was turned upside down with the emergence of Impressionism, an avant-garde art movement at the time. Born in Paris, France, Impressionism was founded by a unique group of artists who each opted to abandon traditional rules of art in favor of a new approach. Looking at Impressionist art today may not seem radical, but the artists of this 19th century movement were definitely defiant with their work. We're going to look at some of the factors that led to this incredible art movement. Here we're looking at a painting by Claude Monet. The artist's wife Camille stands on a hill with their son Jean behind her. Monet worked quickly to record this moment. We know this because he left areas of canvas exposed in his haste. And here on the left, you can see the actual painting as it hangs in the museum to get a little bit idea of scale. The title of the painting is Woman with a Parasol, which makes me wonder, did you ever use a parasol to protect yourself from the sun? So what was going on in France and the world at this time? In the 19th century, France was a country of immigration for people and political refugees from Eastern Europe. There was class warfare, but also revolutions and protests. This 1884 painting shows us the smoke from factories in the background. Can you see the boy who looks like he's yelling? Let's see what he's yelling at. He's calling out to the wealthy people across the river. As the Industrial Revolution progressed, the Parisian lower class became increasingly hostile toward the upper class and middle class. Georges Seurat is not considered an impressionist, although his work is closely related to the movement. He is known as a neo-impressionist because he was really focusing on the science and theories of color. Early in the 19th century, Paris factories hired entire families. So husbands, wives, and children would all work together as many had previously on the farm. Did you or anyone you know ever work in a factory? In mid-19th century France, artists depended on public exhibitions to connect them with patrons who were willing to buy their artworks. Following the Revolution and the abolishment of the Royal Academy, non-member artists were permitted to exhibit artworks in the salon. So being accepted to the salon was vital for artists because the jury's decision affected how the public saw your art. Paintings that were accepted by the salon were more likely to sell. Here are a few of the now famous paintings that were once rejected by the salon. The first Impressionist exhibition, as it would soon be called, only ran for a month. Artists showcased were all previously rejected by traditional institutions. When the show closed, history had been made. This was the first time that artists had banded together to show their work to the public directly, without the sanction of the French government or the judgment of an academic jury. This painting is credited with inspiring the name of the Impressionist movement. The initial response was hostile. Critics thought the work was limited, more like a childish daubing than a mature oil painting. But it is funny how things work out. What was once ridiculed as amateurish and unrefined is now celebrated as revolutionary. Monet's Impression Sunrise, with its hazy depiction of a sunrise, has become one of the defining works of the movement. That's the thing about trailblazers. They're often misunderstood at first. Although Impression Sunrise was painted in a room overlooking the port, Monet had started experimenting with the plein air, painting outdoor technique by 1872. And an 1885 painting that we're looking at here by John Singer Sargent shows Monet painting in this style. The Impressionists didn't wait for the perfect moment. They painted the moments that were already there.
Paris in the 1870s was alive with motion. Streets widened, crowds grew, light fell differently on the faces of a changing city. A new generation of artists stepped into this world with open eyes and restless hands. They set up their canvases in gardens, at train stations, beside the water. They began to paint what they saw, directly, honestly, without filters or illusions. Brushstrokes came quickly. The colours shimmered. Nothing was outlined or frozen in place. Every canvas held a sense of movement, a glimpse of the world as it passed. They turned their attention to sky, water, sunlight, ordinary scenes filled with changing light and air. These artists began to paint time as it unfolded. Modern life entered the frame. Friends gathered on balconies. Waiters moved through open-air cafes. Couples danced beneath lanterns. The moment itself became the subject. The city no longer stood still. Paintings reflected this new rhythm, faster, lighter, more alive. Edgar Degas often stayed indoors. He studied dancers in rehearsal rooms, women at their dressing tables, figures lost in thought. These were not grand scenes, but quiet spaces where people existed without performance. His work observed without interruption. Each figure remained fully within their world. In his later years, Monet returned again and again to the same garden. The pond, the lilies, the arching bridge. With each season, he found new colours, new reflections, new moods. The surface of the water was never still, nor were the paintings. They held the passage of light through time. At first, their work was misunderstood, but the world slowly changed. Today, these paintings are part of how we understand vision itself. Impressionism remains close to us, not just in galleries, but in the way we notice morning light, a moving cloud, or the reflection in a puddle. The Impressionists did not wait for perfect moments. They painted the moments that were already there, alive, temporary, full of light.
I hope you enjoyed that video. The group had one more small show, but things weren't looking good until their third show. It all started with a dinner party. In attendance were 7 artists, including Monet, Renoir, and Degas. The year is 1877. You can already imagine that this was no ordinary gathering. The evening's host was lawyer-turned-artist Gustave Caillebotte. Much like his guests, Caillebotte had begun to dabble in a new form of painting. Armed with riches from the family business he inherited, Caillebotte wanted to set a new course for modern French art. Here's another Caillebotte painting. This was shown in the second exhibit. Critics called the subject matter vulgar, yet they praised the floor scrapers for its immediacy. Now, some art historians have questioned whether this is actually a painting of three men. Perhaps it is one man shown multiple times? Edward Muybridge was experimenting with stop-motion photography at the time. It was filled with exciting possibilities, and it's quite possible that Caillebotte was inspired by that. We really can't talk about Impressionism without mentioning photography. Did you like to take photographs? What did you like to take pictures of? Princess Metternich was known as the ambassadress of pleasure. She was a glamorous figure in Parisian high society during the Second Empire. A pioneer of fashion, she promoted new styles of dresses, including the crinoline. This photo was printed on cards and widely distributed in 1867, and it happens to be one of the first painted portraits to have been based on a photograph. Degas makes no attempt to disguise its origin, but you can see that unlike the photo, which is sharply focused, he is conveying this blurring effect, almost like she's turning her head. Photography influenced the Impressionist interest in capturing a snapshot of ordinary people doing everyday things. The taking of fixed or still images provided a new medium in which to capture reality. It changed the way people in general, and artists in particular, saw the world. It created new artistic opportunities. Edgar Degas was one Impressionist who was so intrigued with this new ability to capture a moment in time that he pursued photography also as a creative outlet. And there are a number of examples of how he used his knowledge of photography in his art, which you can see in his sketches and paintings of racehorses. Have you ever ridden on a horse? But photography isn't the only influence on the Impressionists. Japanese art had a strong influence on French Impressionism. During this remarkable time in European art history, Japanese artworks flooded the Western market. Claude Monet actually had a large collection of Japanese art in his studio. One trademark feature of Japanese art that sets it apart is the use of bold, flat panels of colors. And here you can see we're comparing the Memory Café on the left with a Japanese work on the right-hand side. You can really see how those bold, flat colors are inspired. Decorative, brightly colored floral motifs are also a recurring theme in many different styles of Japanese art. The Impressionists were particularly fascinated by them. In much of Claude Monet's late art, we see the influence of Oriental flowers come into the forefront. Here we're looking at one of Monet's famous water lilies and bridge paintings. And there's the painting on the left, and on the right, the actual garden at Monet's house and studio in France with the beautiful bridge. Monet's house and studio, where this was painted, is now a museum that thousands of people visit every year. In many Japanese prints, we see women taking part in domestic, sometimes deeply intimate scenes, performing rituals like brushing their hair or bathing. Both Degas and Cassatt explored similar ideas in their own art. Sometimes people ask me why there are not many stories about great women artists, and I tell them actually there are, and more all the time. I guess we should just be amazed that there are so many females who manage to break into the art world at all. They had a lot of challenges throughout history. A limited access to art education, where formal artistic training was often denied or limited. Women were frequently excluded from exhibitions and other professional opportunities. Here you're looking at a couple of photos of one woman who broke the barrier This is Mary Cassatt. She was a native of Pennsylvania, a cultured woman educated in London, Paris, and Berlin. She was fluent in French and German, and she lived in Paris beginning in 1874. Edgar Degas saw Cassatt's work at the Salon, and in 1877 he asked her to exhibit with the Impressionists. Cassatt's painting style and subject matter changed greatly because of her association with Impressionism. Mary Cassatt devoted much of her career to a modern redefinition of the ancient theme of motherhood. She expressed the heroism of everyday life. Let's take a look at one more work by Cassatt. This is one of my favorites by her. That a woman produced this image is no coincidence. The nursery in middle-class homes was a space that was rarely, if ever, visited by men. Child-rearing was an exclusively female occupation, so it's little wonder then that few male artists painted babies or young children. This really conveys that feeling of the huffing and puffing, the tiresomeness a child feels in an adult world, doesn't it? And don't you love that little dog? Mary Cassatt was doing most of her paintings indoors, but how did those other Impressionists manage to get outside? What helped them break the confines of their studios after centuries of artists working indoors? Here is the invention that helped pave the way for Impressionists to go outside. Paint tubes were invented in 1841. This invention revolutionized oil painting by providing a convenient way to store and transport paints. Before the invention, artists often struggled with the messiness and limited shelf life of paints that were stored in pig's bladders. They would frequently burst or leak, and they were difficult to seal properly after using them, which caused the paints to dry out quickly. This invention of the tube, the collapsible metal tube with a screw cap, offered a more reliable and portable solution for paint storage. Crucial for the development of Impressionism, enabling artists to paint outdoors more easily and capture the nuances of light and color directly from nature. The increased accessibility of paint tubes also led to the development of a wider range of colors and a shift toward purchasing pre-mixed paint from suppliers rather than having to grind the pigments and mix them by hand. Painting outdoors enabled artists to capture natural scenes with immediacy and freshness. And the loose, visible brushstrokes of the Impressionists created movement and a sense of being spontaneous, as you can see here in this detail from Monet haystack painting. Impressionists focused on capturing the effects of natural light to show changing atmospheres in their artwork, and they explored how light can change how we see things through different times of the day. The Rouen Cathedral series was painted in the 1890s by Claude Monet. Monet rented spaces across the street from the cathedral as his temporary studio and painted more than 30 paintings in the year 1892 to 93. Monet found that the thing he had set out to paint, light, was an almost impossible thing to capture because of its ever-changing nature and extreme subtlety. By the way, Monet had great timing here. In the early 1890s, France was seeing a revival of interest in Catholicism, and the subject of one of its major cathedrals was very well received. We saw a painting by Pierre-Auguste Renoir in the video a few minutes ago. Renoir's paintings often depict joyful moments of social life filled with warmth and connection. Although the young Renoir had a natural gift for drawing, he exhibited a greater talent for singing. However, due to the family's financial circumstances, he had to discontinue his music lessons and leave school at the age of 13 to pursue an apprenticeship at a porcelain factory. He frequently tired of working at the factory, and he sought refuge in the galleries of the Louvre, which was close to his home. The owner of the factory recognized his talent and communicated this to Renoir's family. Following this, Renoir started taking lessons to prepare for entry into art school. When the porcelain factory adopted mechanical reproduction processes in the late 1850s, Renoir was forced to find other means to support his learning. The Industrial Revolution basically left him and many others jobless, but this was a lucky thing for all of us. Here we are looking at 3 of his beautiful works. By the end of his life, Renoir was able to revisit the Louvre and see his own paintings hanging in the museum that he had so often visited as a child. Have you ever visited the Louvre Museum in Paris? And we already mentioned that it was a much more difficult road for women to become artists. Bertha Morisot, Mary Cassatt, Susan Valadon, and Camille Claudel, they're just a few of the women who broke into this man's world of painting, sometimes through modeling. Here we are looking at a painting that Manet did of Bertha Morisot, along with a photo of her and her own painting on the right. These were all completed in the same year of 1872. These women were serious painters. Some of them taught themselves and some made it through art school. The Academy was pretty strict about the role of women in art. They wanted it to be minimal. But because Impressionism was fighting the Academy, it made its own rules. I gotta love these rebels. So while Impressionism wasn't the first modern movement to have women artists, it had a higher female acceptance rate. Here we are looking at a joyful Renoir painting in which Susan Valadon, who is a painter herself, is the model. Some art critics like to say that she was her own muse. This is how she painted herself. So let's look back again. This is how Renoir painted her. Here's how she saw herself. She looks tough and strong here, doesn't she? Total girl power. Edgar Degas is regarded as one of the founders of Impressionism. He didn't paint outdoors as many of the other Impressionists did. Early in his career, his ambition was actually to be a history painter, and he was well prepared by his academic training and close study of classic art. In his early 30s, he changed course and became a classical painter of modern life. Degas was the only major French painter of the Impressionist generation to travel to the United States, where he stayed with his brother. He painted what he saw there, producing a number of works, many depicting family members. The house that he lived in New Orleans is now a museum and hotel run by descendants of Degas. One of Degas' New Orleans works, depicting a scene at the Cotton Exchange in New Orleans, got lots of favorable attention back in France. This was his only work purchased by a museum during his lifetime. Degas also produced bronze sculptures, prints, and drawings. He painted portraits, landscapes, horses, and workers. But most of us know him best by his work with the subject of dance. More than half of his works depict dancers. Did you ever take any kind of a dance class? What began as a rebellious act against rigid tradition has evolved into one of the most beloved art movements of all time. Impressionist works are now celebrated in museums worldwide. Millions of people flock to see these paintings, drawn to their warmth, vibrancy, and humanity. The Impressionists didn't just redefine art, they redefined how we see the world. And while their loose brushstrokes and unconventional methods might have shocked critics back then, today they inspire us to embrace imperfection and find beauty in the everyday. So the next time you're outside, take a moment. Notice how the sunlight filters through the trees or how shadows stretch across a sidewalk. Maybe, just for a second, you'll see the world through the eyes of an Impressionist. Thanks again to AgeSpan and Right at Home Boston North for making it possible for us to spend time together each month. I'll see you again next month with a new theme and some different pictures to help us see the world in new ways. Until then, I'm Siobhan Wishing you all a wonderful day. Goodbye, friends. Goodbye, friends. Goodbye, friends. It's time to say goodbye. Goodbye, my friends. I'll see you soon.